Scandal may not get the same number of clicks online as many of their heavier or more internationally focused peers, but don't let that fool you. The legendary four-piece are incredibly well known in Japan and have inspired many beloved artists. Just ask bandmate Akane, and doing so over their record-setting 17+ year career without a single hiatus or lineup change. Just ask the Guinness World Records. And this hasn't been 17 years of resting on their laurels, running down the clock and cashing in on some past hit singles. Scandal have released material regularly over their entire career, all of which has charted with quite consistent reliability. And by reliability, I mean they've always been somewhere in the charts. Never the chart topper, never the head-turning breakout star, never the most celebrated or viral, and yet, if you look at what they've actually managed to influence, what they've actually done, they are undeniably the queens of the 21st century's surge in all-female Japanese rock bands. Because when you don't have a marketing angle or a niche genre to propel you, you've got to just knuckle down to pumping out great songs. You've got to have great innovation and ideas to keep your sound from getting tired and stale. And you're also going to need enough consistency of quality to keep from losing fans to just apathy over time. But Scandal have achieved all of that and seemingly so much more. So here we are with studio album number 11, Luminous, coming out proudly in the middle of a music scene full of girls rock bands that Scandal did so much to proliferate. Luminous, an album that itself follows up Mirror, and yes, naming albums and songs has never exactly been their strong suit, had many people hoping for a return to more of a band sound after its predecessor had been one of the most off-the-wall offerings to date, perhaps due to it being written amidst the COVID isolation era. So, this new album, Luminous. We're going to find out if it's any good, at least in my opinion, and given the high bar that it has to live up to. And yes, Luminous very clearly sets out to rectify one of Mirror's core disadvantages in that from the very beginning, this sounds like a band in a room together making songs as a group. Mirror's gift and curse of being created during the COVID years made it a thoughtful and experimental album, but it never quite sounded as much like an album of band songs as its predecessors before Mirror had, and so Luminous's opening track, Gunjo Pleats, quickly puts this to rest. So let's get into the track-by-track section of this review, and flexing that band sound with some delicious stop-start sort of moments where all four members skip the beat at the same time. Gunjo Pleats really sounds like musical shorthand for "we're back." The song carries a single-worthy chorus hook, a great playful flow, and a slightly 80s-esque timbre that reappears on other songs throughout Luminous. In other words, it's a great head-turning album opener. I've heard some complaints about the bizarre, almost noise rock solo Mammy does in the bridge of this song, but to me, it almost feels more like a band giddy to return and be playful than a misstep. Perhaps a tad unusual, but more exuberant than annoying. If anything, this song's only failing is in having a little bit of cowbell, instead of more cowbell. But anyway, on to track 2, and we're straight into Fanfare, which had a video release on the same day as the album, replete with bright blue and white colouring that matched the album's promotional art. Fanfare was clearly supposed to be, well, the album's fanfare. In the context of the album though, it's a great fun song that ups the energy and tempo even more from that opening number, and as a single, I think it was a fairly nice safe choice. The sort of rock and roll song that Scandal could do in their sleep, but that's not to say it sounds phoned in or anything, just that if you were looking at a list of their hits, it may not stand out above the rest. Still, it is a very good Scandal doing Scandal kind of song. Catchy enough, and with a positive spring in its step, it keeps the energy up as we barrel into track 3, Watashitachi, which literally means us or we. It's a similar fun song, but with more of a lush mid-tempo arrangement characterised by a lot of keyboard sounds punctuating the rock and roll song. If anything, it gave me strong vibes of Japanese legendary pop rock singer-songwriter Aiko, who wrote almost all of her songs on piano. So in a way, Watashitachi is swapping out some of that rock energy for more of the thick arrangement and interesting chord progression that gives Tomomi a lot of fun bass walking to indulge in, if nothing else. Watashitachi really keeps the album on an exciting note as we cross the 1/4 mark, and I must say it is one of my favourite arrangements and sort of sonic sounds on the entire album. And then we come across Plum. I'd say the 4th track has a real chilled out kind of disco energy to it, bouncing along with a playful skip and a fun little hook more than necessarily delivering anything hugely memorable. I felt like it was the vibe of One More Time, but not with the same sort of killer hook. Thus, it certainly makes a nice little addition to the overall variety of the album, but doesn't so much especially make a mark of its own. A fun little pop song. And just like that, we arrive at Candy. One in a long history of B-sides from the album's singles that then wind up on the actual album itself. Now, on the surface, I really hate that particular marketing choice as it leads to spoilering such large chunks of the album before the tracklist is even revealed. However, spoiled or not, this is an absolutely great little song for whittling into your brain. From the creative minimalist opening that toys with sudden rising strings behind a playfully spaced out arrangement, all the way through to the chorus's refrain, which is both incredibly catchy and even gives off a little bit of a Hey Jude vibe, Candy is absolutely one of the most engagingly fun songs on the album, and I would argue probably the catchiest. Marrying a light breeziness with a nostalgic sound, emotional depth, Candy is creative fun up until its playfully sudden final note. A highlight on the album, even if cruelly spoilt weeks in advance. I still love it every time it comes around. Perhaps not the sentiment I would, however, share or reserve for Vision, the next track on the album and the second of the songs to have been spoiled as a B-side pre-album release. This track got a lot of hype upon its appearance as Line of Sight's B-side, with some even labelling it as the better song on that release. And yet I can't help but feel a lot of that is driven by Tomomi's seriously cool bass line that dances throughout the song, but outside of said bassline, Vision feels rather plodding and pedestrian compared to most of the album, not really presenting a clear, emotional direction, and with a chorus that was actually unusually grating upon multiple listens. It would also be fair to say that the album's mastering compression maybe hurts this song a little bit more than many of the others, and although Vision is not exactly a bad song, the fact remains that it is probably the nearest thing to a skipper on Luminous. A song that doesn't really provoke much of a feeling at all, as it just sort of inoffensively passes by. In short, it's alright. Now, as we arrive safely in the second half of the album, Loop sets about reasserting some of that initial energy we got from the first few tracks, but in a slightly more raw way. Kicking in with a loud stomp and a rumbling bass line, it's a growling rock song that adds a shot of adrenaline into the album just as it was starting to sound a little overcomfortable. An old school pounding rock song with machine gun snare fills, chugging guitars, distorted riffing, and a ton of headbang, but most of all working because of where it sits on the album. In isolation, this song would be a relatively standard riff-laden foot stomper of the kind that bands like The Pretty Reckless or Nemophila put out on quite a regular basis, but on this album, it's a piece of variation that feels welcome and not at all forced. At a barely 3-minute runtime, it doesn't outstay its welcome either. A nice palate cleanser to prepare you for the second half, and quickly followed up by Luminous's lead single, Line of Sight, which picks up Loop's heavier energy like a relay runner and flies onwards with it. From the minute Line of Sight debuted as a single last year, I really felt it was more about re-establishing Scandal as a rock band than necessarily smashing any charts, as you really have to strain to find a very catchy or memorable hook here. I mean, it's grown on me with time, but the chorus isn't really what this is about. That's not what this song's about doing. More so, it's the song's enthusiastic energy and detail. Where Loop was a straight energetic headbanger designed to slap you around the face, Line of Sight instead rocks its way through a detailed and frenetic arrangement alive with layered guitars, cheeky production effects, quick changes of rhythm and tons of instrumental flair. At points, it feels more Sokoninaru than Stereo Pony, and I'm okay with that. This song is really about reminding you that despite Scandal's preference for catchy and relatively easygoing music that's very easy to access, they are also fantastic musicians who can do a little bit of flexing from time to time. That's one of the reasons why Line of Sight I think went down well so much with fans and really sits so nicely in Luminous. But this brings us on to A Nata He, another song that was a bit of a grower to be honest. Here we get the first real blast of lead guitarist Mami's voice, which serves to break things up on an album that, up until this point, you could be forgiven for having not known was the product of a band where all 4 members actively do sing and occasionally even sing lead. Luminous certainly gives the majority of work to primary singer Haruna. However, I can't say I'd been too bothered by this up until this point, or even particularly noticed it, until A Nata He came on and sort of shone a light on that. The song itself is a pretty straightforward pop rock number in a way that hits all of the classic Scandal J-pop rock beats that we know and love. It's the perfect song to maintain the upbeat energy as we move towards the end of this eclectic album. We start to come full circle towards the pop rock place we started after some fun tangents into Scandal's experimentation. And next, and penultimately, the oddly named 147 brings a calm and nostalgic vibe that had me swaying from side to side, singing along, and all with some heartwarmingly playful production that particularly shone through towards the end. I really enjoyed the pianos and vocal layering that occasionally sort of peeked in that final crescendo. I've been told that the song name and maybe even the lyrics have a little bit more special meaning in this, so apologies that I didn't really do a deep dive, but I must say that it was just a nice song that sort of sat well towards the end of an album and started again to continue that wrapping up as we come towards the final track. Because all of this brings us on to the next and yes, final song on the album, Highlight no Naka de Bokura Zutto. And although it is hard to pick a best song in an album that strives for variation, there's no doubt that this is the winner for me. Even knowing that this crescendo to the Luminous tracklist had been on repeat play for me months in advance of the album's arrival, it was still excitement when it came up at the end of Luminous to wrap things up. Replete with a beautiful melody, memorable chorus, sonically lush arrangement, and vocal variation that included Mami getting more vocals as she bounced off of Haruna. This is one of Scandal's, well, best songs ever. Yeah, I've said it. It may not start out hitting you as hard as a lot of Scandal's most beloved songs, but when it's finished, it leaves you significantly more fulfilled. It's a song that may not worm into your ear with as catchy a hook as some of their earlier hits, but it grows on you every time with refreshing listen after refreshing listen and continues to be a rewarding listen long after most pop rock songs would have outstayed their welcome. Simply, it's pure quality. And that's where the Luminous journey comes to an end, which leaves us only to sum up the legendary Scandal's latest offering. But if we're going to give Luminous a fair review, probably the first thing to do is get rid of all the baggage of history and the bullshit of expectation and ask, well, is Luminous 42 minutes of your time well spent? And frankly, I really think it is. The album takes you on a well-crafted journey through a series of interesting soundscapes, catchy melodies, and just enough emotional depth to keep it all feeling like it means something deeper to the band themselves, that they actually had something in their hearts when they were writing this rather than just kicking out another album like so many other groups may well do. It also must be said that none of the variation or twists and turns in the album's runtime are jarring in a way that would interrupt the overall flow of the album, meaning that you can either sit down and really delve into listening to Luminous properly as a journey and concentrating on every little nuance, or pop it on in the background as a quality musical backdrop to a nice drive or a chilled get-together. Oh, but don't worry, I'm aware of the large number of people who've pointed out that they only listen to albums in their entirety once before separating out the tracks they like into playlists for future listening. Yeah, we've done more than enough surveys on this channel in the past to know that even die-hard music fans these days seem increasingly likely to use playlists as their preferable mode of listening. So even if it's not exactly what we think of when we talk about an album review, I guess it's 2024 and we have to ask, how good is this album at updating any Scandal playlist you may well have? Are there enough quality songs here that if you do choose to separate them all up, you're going to be revisiting those individual portions of Luminous for years to come as they nestle into whichever playlist you deem appropriate? Well, just about. There's no doubt in my mind that songs like Line of Sight could sit alongside AMDKJ in a playlist, or that Gunjo Pleats could sit alongside Space Ranger. Maybe Highlight no Naka de Bokura Zutto could be perfect in a playlist with the likes of, say, Pinhill Surfer. Luminous is certainly awash with songs that are as good as any Scandal album's songs in the past, even if not elevating the group to new heights perhaps. But really, that just strengthens the argument that Luminous is at its best when listened to as an album. A complete work showing a moment in the band's history. A complete work created, curated, ordered, and paced correctly by the authors themselves, the band Scandal. I think a lot like Mirror, this album is best viewed as an experience. Like watching an entire movie rather than just going onto YouTube to rewatch some famous scenes in clip form and missing out everything that goes between. Sometimes the highlights, excuse the pun, are all the better when you travel to them via the route and built up context that the artist set out for you in the first place, when they were creating the whole thing. Ultimately though, however you choose to listen to Luminous, it seems like an album that has something for anyone who even stands a chance of being a Scandal fan at all, and thus I think it's got to be considered a definite success. Let me put it this way. If this album had just been released by some fresh-faced band that we'd never heard of before, I think we'd all be raving about it. So perhaps this album's greatest enemy is actually the legacy of the band who created it. The slight apathy of people who've heard of Scandal before and have set onto whatever preconceptions they may have about the band and therefore maybe don't feel the urge to check new things out when they come out. The comparisons made by pre-existing Scandal fans who perhaps pine for former albums that have a nostalgic value it's unfairly difficult to live up to. The younger fans who maybe wouldn't even come across Scandal at all as they're less likely to appear in the places that the band's younger peers may perhaps appear in. You know, hammering away on TikTok or the local livehouse scene, building up that cool new for 2024 rep. Maybe it's all of those things or any combination that could leave potential listeners walking into yet another Scandal album without the excitement or intrigue that it truly deserves. But in all honesty, Luminous is a well-rounded, interesting and truly unique set of songs that only serve to highlight the nuance and experience of the band behind them, whilst maintaining a youthful energy, upbeat joy and creative spark that many of these new head-turning bands could only at their best hope to live up to, let alone surpass. So is Luminous the best Scandal album? No, or more aptly, who cares? Is it better than Mirror? Depends on how you listen to it, I guess. Is it a return to form? This shouldn't even really affect your enjoyment. Switch off all preconceptions and expectations, go into this album as something of its own, unique and new, and if you have any interest at all in Japanese pop rock, I'd be very shocked if you came out anything other than extremely pleased by the experience. And hey, who knows, maybe you'll even become a fan of this fresh-faced new band who you've never heard before. Yeah, think about it like that. Anyway, these have been my thoughts on the new Scandal album Luminous, an album that I hope more people get to hear, and I definitely think a lot of people will enjoy if they give it a chance. But hey, as always, get into the comments and tell me what you thought about this. Remember all the liking and subscribing and YouTubery stuff, and until I hopefully see you very soon in Japan for the next one of these videos, for now, ciao ciao.